advantage of us. And one of the problems that I have, and I've said it openly, I said it to President Zelensky, Europe is in for a tiny fraction of the money that we're in. Now, whether you like that situation or not, Europe is much more affected than the United States. We have a thing called the ocean in between us, right? Why are we in for billions and billions of dollars more money than Europe? And, you know, they're a similar size, a little smaller, but they're a similar size economy as the United States when you add them up. And yet Europe is in for a small fraction of the number the United States is in. Now, Biden could have called them up during the term. That's what I did. I said, you have to pay your bills. And they all, one stood up. I won't say who. You'll probably have it because the papers, the media hated to report on it. But a prime minister stood up from a country, you know, a famous meeting of 28 nations with no press, no anybody in the room. He stood up. He says, does that mean if we don't pay our bill, and at that point it was 2%, it should be 5%. It should be 5%, not 2%. But at that point it was 2%. But many people didn't pay. Some people didn't pay anything. But many people were way, including Germany. Germany was at less than 1%. You're going to press for 5%? Well, I think NATO should have 5%, yeah. Well, you can't do it at 2%. I mean, at 2%, every country, if you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're at 4%. I think they should be, you know, they're in dangerous territory. I think you should be, they can all afford it, but they should be at 5%, not 2%. I'm the one that got them to pay 2%. But a gentleman stood up, a prime minister stood up, and he said to me, sir, could I ask you a question? You're saying we have to pay our bills. If we don't pay our bills, will the United States protect us from Russia? I said, if you don't pay, you mean you're delinquent? He said, yes. He said, if you're delinquent, we will not protect you. I took a lot of heat. Although it was somewhat closed door, I took a lot of heat from the media. And you know what happened? The money started pouring in. That's why NATO has money. And the Secretary General said it was the most incredible thing he had ever seen in a negotiation. Now, if I would have said, yes, we will, nobody would have paid. If I would have loved to say, yes, we'll protect you even if you don't pay. But that's not the way life works.
Mr. President, two questions related to each other. First, you said on your first day of office you're going to pardon January 6th defendants. Are you planning to pardon those who were charged with violent offenses?
Well, we're looking at it, and we have other people in there. And as you see, I guess 24 or 28 people came now from the FBI. That came out very quietly. Nobody reported it, but they had people in some form related to the FBI. They had 4 or 5 people that were strongly related to the FBI. We have to find out about that. We have to find out about Hezbollah. We have to find out about who exactly was in that whole thing, because people that did some bad things were not prosecuted. You know, I see it all the time, and you see it too. People that were doing some bad things weren't prosecuted, and people that didn't even walk into the building are in jail right now. So we'll be looking at the whole thing, but I'll be making major pardons. Yes, please. Please.
On Jack Smith's report.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. It's good to see you again. 2 questions about Syria and the ongoing war in Gaza. About Syria, the Pentagon disclosed last month the U.S. has some 2,000 troops in Syria. That's almost double the number initially we were told of 900. Will you keep that troop capacity the same upon taking
Well, I won't tell you that because that's part of a military strategy. But I will say it was Turkey. Turkey's been after that country in different names and different forms and shapes for 2,000 years. Those people that went in are from Turkey. And President Erdogan is a friend of mine. He's a guy I like, respect. I think he respects me also. He's the one that didn't go after certain people after I requested that he not. You know who I'm talking about, the Kurds. I don't know how long that's going to, because they're natural enemies. They hate each other. But he didn't do that yet. And he didn't do it in the past also. He started, and I said, please don't do that, and he didn't do it. So, but if you look at what happened with Syria, Russia was weakened, Iran was weakened, and he's a very smart guy. And he sent his people in there through different forms and different names, and they went in and they took over, and that's the way it is.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Do you have concerns about HTS taking control of Syria?
By the way, I have the envoy here. Is that in the back? Standing with my son, Eric, is Steve Witkoff, who's just got back from the Middle East, and he's done a fantastic job. He's a a great deal maker. I said, what we need there is a deal maker because nobody makes a deal. We have people that understand where the rivers are and where the meets and bounds are, but they can't talk. They can't make deals. Steve's done a great job. I just want to thank you, Steve. You've been working endlessly for months, and he's working specifically on the hostages, trying to get them back.
Well, that was my second question. Is Hamas
Steve, come up for a second. Maybe you might want to say a couple of words.
Sir,
I didn't-
Hamas released another hostage
I didn't know Steve was going to be here, actually.
Neither did I.
He's done a fantastic job, and it's a dangerous job, too, and we appreciate it. He didn't know about this kind of danger and the other deal-making he does. Now he sees a lot of big danger. Come on up, Steve.
Mr. President, can I ask you a second part of that? Hamas released
Just one
another
second,
hostage
please.
video.
I'm going to give you a little report on the hostages, if I can. Steve? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Wow. Well, I think we're making a lot of progress, and I don't want to say too much because I think they're doing a really good job back in Doha. I'm leaving tomorrow back to go to Doha.
Well, Donald Trump, the President-elect of the United States of America, taking questions from reporters at his Florida private club residence. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is all set to return to the White House as the 47th President of the United States. The inauguration is on the 20th of January, and this is for a second term, and his pre-election rhetoric about increasing tariffs is something that has sparked discussions about potential implications for global trade and India's economy. Donald Trump, of course, has denied a newspaper report that said that his aides were exploring tariff plans that would cover only critical imports. His threats to impose higher tariffs on countries like China and India have also raised eyebrows in global markets. Today, he has said that Canada and Mexico will have to prepare for higher tariffs. We have seen his controversial labeling of India in the past as the Tariff King. Indian economists, experts, policymakers are also debating the potential implications of these policies on India's economy. How should India, how should China, how should other countries prepare for Trump 2.0? That's the big question. We are joined to discuss all of this. We will have a panel of experts with us. We have with us Dr. Richard Benkin with us, who's a commentator and journalist, and we have Jayant Krishna with us, senior fellow in India-US policy, US-India policy. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me on this broadcast. Richard, to you first. We have seen Trump's election rhetoric when it comes to tariffs, but he has also denied the Washington Post report that said that his aides were exploring tariff plans only on critical imports. How should countries prepare for something like this? How do you also expect global markets to react to his tariff plans?
Well, I think the important thing is that people not react simplistically. People should understand, if they want to prepare for this, understand that Donald Trump is a transactional person. He's had a lifetime of negotiation, and I think the tariff issue should be seen as a very important point in those negotiations. A country like India has an awful lot to negotiate with. And then add to that the fact that we know that Donald Trump and Narendra Modi have had a good relationship for quite some time, and there are issues, and they're going to have to sit down and discuss it. But I think it would be a mistake to assume that that's going to happen without any kind of interaction between the United States and, in this case, India.
See these threats as a starting point for India to have better negotiators, and do we really need to be apprehensive about this, or do you just see this as a starting point for negotiations rather than expect immediate actions? Mr. Jayant Krishna, can you, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, is that the question to me?
Yes, sir. It's for you. Do you see this? Do you see the threats as a starting point of negotiations that India will have to think about, and also in some ways, measuring up in that to that scale with the kind of ability that the new Americans under Trump 2.0 will come up with respect to trade and tariffs?
See, President Trump is known to be a no-nonsense president. He means business, and he's very transactional. So let's also see when it comes to the trade between India and US. What are the starting points? I mean, let's understand for US. US happens to be India's largest trading partner. I mean, no other country, India trades more than what it does with the US. That includes both exports and imports. And for India is US's seventh largest trading partner. So I think we have more dependence on the US, and US has lesser dependence on India. If you look at among major economies, our trade between the two countries is approximately of the order of $200 billion, and out of which 125 billion is what US imports from India, and almost 75 to 80 billion is the amount which India imports from the US. So I think, and it is one of the, US is one of the very few countries among the major countries with which India has a trade deficit in its favor, which obviously means that, India exports more to the US than what it imports from the US, right? So I think any duty structure fiddling with it is going to hurt us. That's for sure. In his last presidency, I think he did do it for some product categories like iron and steel and all that, and it did hurt us. So kind of products, if we look at, what's going to be, I mean, if you look at US, typically what it imports from India, it includes IT services, software services, IT-enabled services, textiles, machineries, gems, diamonds, chemicals, iron, steel, coffee, tea, some food products, and pharmaceutical also, On the contrary, what India imports from the US are generally more finished goods like aircrafts, fertilizers, computer hardware, and of course some scrap metal, medical equipment, all manufactured medical equipment and things like that. So I think, I have a feeling he may not do it across the board. What he has talked about doing it with China, with India, with Canada, with Mexico, he may not do it across the board, but I think it will happen in bits and pieces. And at the end of the day, I think it's how well India negotiates with the US. Because I don't think any decision will be completely, unilateral from the US. It will have to be dependent on how we negotiate and how we succeed with that. But surely, I mean, a very, what he talked about in his electoral campaign, if that comes true, it becomes a reality. I think it will hurt India very, very badly.
Right. Also, Richard, do you see Trump's tariff plans already influencing business strategies? Because India is betting big on semiconductors. We are talking a lot about AI, although a lot of our companies are yet to be prepared for that kind of AI drive that we're talking about. How should companies, how should firms, how should the industry or the technology sector or manufacturing sector prepare itself, for Trump 2.0?
Know this to me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Well, again, I think that it is transactional. It's about the negotiation. I think those companies and government entities from India need to recognize that they bring a lot of things to the table, even beyond the economic. Geopolitically, we know that India is the most important bulwark we have. When I say we, I'm talking about as a planet. Most important bulwark we have as a check on Chinese expansion. And that's very important to Donald Trump's global strategy as well. And I think it would behoove Indian negotiators to make sure that factor is included in whatever comes to pass. I think for Americans, certainly for me, most Americans, in many cases with these products, and I'm talking more about the consumer type products, it's a question of, well, will it be, do you want to buy from India or do you want to buy from China? And again, I think if we look at both what the American people have been saying and what President Trump has said, his priorities will be, stopping that Chinese economic expansion as well and reducing the economic interdependency between the U.S. and China is also very important. So these are factors that, whether it's Indian companies or Indian government negotiators, really can bring to the table to come up with something more equitable. Now, I do want to mention one thing that I think will be an issue. We know that India has a history of a lot of protectionist rules and regulations with regards to foreign companies and foreign investment. That might have to be thrown on the table too and negotiated as well. In other words, I think the whole tariff issue is part of something much greater. And I think it will be to the peril of both countries, India and the United States,
Right.
if we ignore that greater context.
Okay. Jayant Krishna, you spoke about India and China, and I have to ask you this. India-China relationship appears poised for another big test. We recently started with disengagement, however, tensions still remain. How do you see Trump approaching, China, in his second term? Because this is also a country that's central to the business interests of Elon Musk, who is also poised to have a central role in his administration. And all of this, do you see this sparking unease in sections of India's strategic community?
See, I mean, if you look at, India is a very, very useful country, first of all, when it comes to, how US deals with China, not to a lesser extent from the economy perspective, but more from the geopolitical perspective. I think given our location on the world map, I think it's very, very important, So I think many of the import duty stuff that he has talked about, I think it relates to China, because let's also look at how China has emerged as a manufacturing hub of the world, and more and more, manufacturing supply chains terminate at China, in terms of endpoint manufacturing. So I think that is the bigger concern for the US, looking at the enormity, and that's the only economy. I mean, whatever we may talk about, but our economy is barely 1/5 or 1/6 of the size of China, and even smaller vis-a-vis the US, right? So the direct confrontation is with China that US would have, and India, would surely be a key player in that. But I think more importantly, I think as between India and China, in the geopolitical sense, there is some thaw in the relationship, in the sense that some border issues are going to be settled, or some discussions are on. That's my personal view, not the view of the organization I may be representing. But I think India and China must develop very, very deep economic ties. That's very important. If you look at post-COVID, as more and more companies and nations were looking at locating their manufacturing supply chains other than China, I think there India was a front runner. It continues to be the front runner. But if the problem is, many of Indian manufacturing supply chains are not integrated with that of China. If that integration existed, more and more business would have flown to us. I think I definitely feel that even many of our geopolitical disputes with China would get resolved if our economic relationship improves. India stands to gain much more by engaging more from an economy perspective with China than China stands to gain. I think that's very important. And even the economic survey, which was presented in the parliament before the budget, did talk about it, that there's a need for a greater integration of Indian manufacturing supply chains with those of China. And if that happens, we will stand to gain. And then we would also perhaps get nearer to nurture our dream of becoming as one of the manufacturing workshops of the world, and rather than just everything going the Chinese way,
That's a very important point. India also has to take advantage of the supply chain opportunities that it is often presented with. US President-elect Donald Trump has denied reports of his aides exploring limited tariffs on critical imports. He has in fact reaffirmed his broader tariff policy. We'll have to wait and see how that works out. Thank you, Professor Benkin, and thank you, Jayant Krishna, for joining us on this broadcast. Also, let's listen into what Donald Trump said today on tariffs.
Going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name. And it's appropriate. It's appropriate. And Mexico has to stop allowing millions of people to pour into our country. They can stop them. And we're going to put very serious tariffs on Mexico and Canada, because Canada, they come through Canada too, and the drugs that are coming through are at record numbers, So we're going to make up for that by putting tariffs on Mexico and Canada, substantial tariffs.
Well, hours after the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, resigned in a surprise move, US President-elect Donald Trump renewed his offer of making Canada the 51st state of the United States of America. Trump, who has never had a good relationship with Trudeau even during his first term from 2017 to 2021, has been floating the idea of making Canada the 51st state of the United States ever since he met Trudeau after his 5th November electoral victory. Taking to Truth Social, Trump said, and I quote, "Many people in Canada love being the 51st state. The United States can no longer suffer the massive trade deficits and subsidies that Canada needs to stay afloat." Justin Trudeau knew this and resigned. Well, the US will remove regulations that have prevented cooperation between key Indian nuclear entities and American companies, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Monday, marking a major step forward in implementing the landmark 2005 Civil Nuclear Agreement. The top official of the outgoing Joe Biden administration made this announcement during a public address at the IIT Delhi.
The United States is now finalizing the necessary step civil nuclear cooperation between India's leading nuclear entities and U.S. companies. The formal paperwork will be done soon, but this will be an opportunity to turn the page on some of the frictions of the past and create opportunities for entities that have been on restricted lists in the United States to come off those lists.
In its final move before making way to President-elect Donald Trump, the Biden administration further cemented ties with India, with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who we heard speaking earlier, revealing that the U.S. government is moving to lift sanctions imposed on Indian nuclear institutions. The U.S., along with numerous other countries, sanctioned 200 Indian entities almost 26 years ago after India's Pokhran-2 nuclear tests in May 1998. Pokhran-2, or the Operation Shakti, involved a series of 5 nuclear weapons tests and gave India the capability to build fission and thermonuclear weapons. While over the past few decades, most countries lifted sanctions against India, including the United States, especially after the historic 2005 India-US civil nuclear deal, certain restrictions continue to remain. These restrictions, as well as India's objections to certain stringent conditions in this deal, stalled the agreement's full implementation. However, the Biden administration's latest move hopes to forge deeper energy ties with New Delhi and potentially strengthen the 20-year-old landmark nuclear deals between the two countries, which was signed in 2005. Now, India utilizes nuclear power plants for a significant portion of its energy needs, presenting a substantial and growing market for nuclear energy and reactors, and making it an attractive market for India. India is also actively pursuing large-scale development of nuclear reactors, particularly small modular reactors, to meet its future energy demands, making collaborations between the India and the US nuclear sectors mutually beneficial and attractive. Which is why now that the US National Security Advisor, while he did not provide details about the removal of these sanctions, the growing progress in ties between New Delhi and Washington has definitely driven this move of removing sanctions and has further strengthened the relationship between the two countries ahead of the return of the Trump administration.